Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, going well, Aaron. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Well, before I kick off, I might do a bit of a history lesson here to give some context as to today's topic around education directions. We know from the Super System Review, or also known as the Cooper Review, and Tim and I will show our age to know that we were fully entrenched in that back in 2009-10 and the final report around 2011. We really, within the SMSF landscape, the ATO as regulator really only had to them two avenues to deal with that non-compliance, and what I kind of referred to as the feather duster, so a bit of a slap on the wrist, or the alternative was the nuclear option and to make a fund non-complying. And one of those outcomes from that Cooper review was to put in place a recommendation, which is now ultimately embedded into law, a range of ways in which the ATO can ensure that a fund continues to comply with its compliance obligations. Now, we've seen the administrative penalties as probably the most utilised lever that they now have available to them. And one of those other areas was education directions. Now, why am I talking about all that? Well, the reality is we have now in 2025 seen a draft practice statement, law administration 2025/D2. It is still in draft, but recently closed at the end of October for comment. So, Tim, can you elaborate on why this has been put in play and ultimately what this practice statement around education directions actually means?
Yeah, look, I guess, and there's a level, as always, of speculation associated with my answer on this one, Aaron. But the reality is as you and I both know, self-managed super funds from a compliance point of view and from a regulatory point of view moved over to the tax office in 2000, around that time, and for many years the ATO took ultimately an education approach to compliance and non-compliance, as you talked about with your two forms of penalty, which was none or nuclear in that regard. And so whilst when these powers came in, sort of, let's say in the 2000 teens, we've had progressively more and more funds sort of coming under that penalty regime. And so we see that the ATO have moved more from an education approach, which they still do and still do well in many regards, to compliance as well. So making sure that they're making examples of funds that aren't doing the right thing, which then helps, I guess, from a further education point of view for new trustees coming into the system. But one of the things was, and I think a little bit of this has got to do with content as well, and having the appropriate material available to be able to send trustees to undertake education. But one of the penalty options is to issue trustees with a education direction that required them to go and undertake a course of education to enhance their knowledge from an SMSF trustee point of view. Now, ultimately, what this practice statement has done is it's highlighted the key scenarios when it would be appropriate to issue an education direction, and it's ultimately directed at tax office staff from a policy point of view to say this is when you should look at it versus this is when you definitely shouldn't look at it, and really what they're highlighting is, as they've indicated, two key points. One is correcting knowledge gaps, which has led to past contraventions, is one of the key ones there, and then improving and refreshing overall trustee knowledge, which in their mindset then reduces the likelihood of future contraventions occurring. So make a mistake in the past, let's brush up your knowledge to ensure that you don't do that again, and in other instances, continue to brush up knowledge so you don't breach anything else moving forward. So they're kind of the two key scenarios that they're looking at, and then they're going to look particularly at the age of the trustee, and by that I don't mean whether they're 35 or 45, it's how long have they been trustee, to determine whether or not they should have the assumed knowledge to do what they're doing. So, how implicit was the trustee in the breach, with regards to, there's a genuine error because of a lack of knowledge, or they knew what they were doing, and therefore we shouldn't be applying an education direction. We should be going down that different path, which might be, as you mentioned before, admin penalties, right? Or it could then lead to other things such as court. It could lead to
trustee disqualification, all those different things.
Non-compliance and those sorts of elements. So it's kind of a guidance as to when you might see a trustee issued with with an education direction.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting because you wonder why it's taken them so long. And I think the reality as to why it's taken so long in this space is because they've now only got their own education product available. This was an area where there were, I know the CPAs and the chartered accountants had something. There were different service providers in the industry. Now they all needed to be free. So maintaining currency and accuracy of information and how long they needed to be and what they needed to cover. Ultimately, we saw people come and go in here as to what was approved by the ATO. So therefore, when we saw the reforms in 2007 and 2017, I should say, the time, effort and energy to do those things just really dissipated to the extent that we didn't really end up with any. And ultimately, the ATO has reconfigured that strategy and put in place now their own education course that people must do. So it does raise the interesting question as to how much the ATO may now look to use this as a means to ensure that trustees do the right thing. Because what I foresee here now is that now that they have that tool available, we're not in a situation whereby we've got any mandated education for people to move into the SMSF industry, but they want to ensure that when you are signing that trustee declaration, you are fully versed and aware of what those responsibilities are. And therefore, off the back of that, one of those conditions is when you complete the course, you're also actually required to redo your trustee declaration to also confirm that you actually, once again, you're fully aware and versed as to what your obligations are as a trustee.
Yeah, and look, and this is testing my memory a little bit. So I'm just going to say somewhere between today and the Cooper review,
small window.
It's a small window. So it was either part of the Cooper review, but I actually feel that it was later than the Cooper review. There was a further review which was undertaken that tried to mandate trustee education to the sense where one of the recommendations was that all new trustees should be doing a course of education before they become a trustee, which of course that was shut down in the review sort of process itself. So I think that's why I think it was later than Cooper. But that concept really does stem from the whole knowledge piece. And I think you're right in the sense of the timing being right and the ATO having the appropriate content available for it. But also the other thing, and you and I again spoke recently in one of our previous Feeling Smarter, I think to do with loans or one of the other things that we were talking about, where we were saying that often from a compliance point of view, the position, it's a lot of ACRs, a lot of contraventions go effectively unactioned because the activity of the trustee, they believe it's been rectified or it has been rectified or whatever, or they don't feel it warrants any further action from themselves. From a regulatory point of view, or more to the point, they possibly don't have the staffing to be able to follow up the contravention themselves. And so there are a lot of knowledge gaps that go missing. And I think the simplicity of associating an education direction versus, say, reviewing something to determine whether admin penalties apply will be far easier to regulate from an ATO point of view. So I think it gives them far greater grounds to reach out to trustees and say, you may or may not have contravened, but this is a good opportunity to undertake this education, do this, re-sign that, know your knowledge, then we're going to tick the box that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and this, the education that they build is obviously publicly available. So, ordinarily you encourage people as much as you can to understand your roles and responsibilities as trustee to do so. But to me, I think, it'll be fascinating to see what the ATO or how the ATO looks to utilize this as we move into 2026 and again, what those behaviours look like and then, ultimately the approach of ensuring that they have a behaviour set within the industry about doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's right. And look, and I think the other thing is they've got their practice statements about disqualification. They've got their practice statements
Yes.
about admin penalties and other things. So it really was effectively rounding out the tools available to them to deal with non-compliance or minor breaches from a SIS point of view.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again for your contribution this week.
Always a pleasure.
And we look forward to seeing you next week for our next edition of Feeling Smarter. Take care and bye for now.
See you all.